and welcome to From Nowhere to Nothing, Ontological Oxymorons. I'm your host, Joel Bouchard, a doctoral student in psychology, and with me today is Mr. Norman Gayford, a professor of English and philosophy. While it is readily apparent that the animals in Aesop's fables are stand-ins for people, there is one whose stories tend to have a direct, impactful correlation with human society, particularly people as workers. The sheer number of tales written about this creature tend to corroborate this view. And of course, when we think of the animal that most represents human beings, we obviously picture the donkey. So, we'll preface it. We were talking about it a little bit before the show. These fables in the original do not reference a donkey. They reference another animal that, based upon our sort of contractual obligations with the podcast providers, we cannot pronounce the name of. But it's a 3-letter word that starts with A, that can be considered a swear word, but long ago was merely just a name for a donkey. And you mentioned that there is a distinct difference between a donkey and this other word. And do you want to talk about it a little bit?
The word that shall not be said is undomesticated. The donkey is domesticated. And while that may seem like a very minor distinction, as we read the stories and talk about them, some very peculiar things come up because of that distinction.
Yeah, that's actually it's a very big distinction if you think about it, because in a lot of these stories, the animal is domesticated, but he doesn't want to be.
Right.
He doesn't want
right.
to. So
yeah.
And so that other word is probably more appropriate for the creature in question than the one we'll be using. But for the sake of political correctness, we don't know whose little ears are listening or what the case may be. We'll stick with donkey. All right, so there's a lot of stories that we're going to cover. Like I said, of the animals we've looked at so far, by far there's twice as many stories written about the donkey as any of the other ones.
Yeah.
And that was what was striking me as I was reading through them. As I go, oh, okay, I'm the donkey in this story, or oh yeah, I've definitely met this donkey before in real life. Like there's something very human about the donkey stories. Whereas, with the fox or the eagle, some of it might be a little abstract. It might seem like, okay, well, this story was made up to get a moral across. The donkey stories seem very pertinent.
This is a story about people.
Yes,
yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, it's probably some of the most earthy on the ground stories.
Yeah, stories about people and a lot of stories about how people relate to being governed, I think. Mm-hmm. So we'll dive right into it. The first one is the donkey and his masters. Mm-hmm. So I'll start out. A donkey belonging to an herb seller who gave him too little food and too much work made a petition to Jupiter to be released from his present service and provided with another master. Jupiter, after warning him that he would repent his request, caused him to be sold to a tile maker. Shortly afterwards, finding that he had heavier loads to carry and harder work in the brick field, he petitioned for another change of master. Jupiter, telling him that it would be the last time that he could grant his request, ordained that he should be sold to a tanner. The donkey found that he had fallen into worse hands, and noting his master's occupation, said, groaning, "It would have been better for me to have been either starved by the one or to have been overworked by the other of my former masters than to have been bought by my present owner, who will even after I am dead tan my hide and make me useful to him." So the explicit moral, the donkey and his masters, is he that finds discontentment in one place is not likely to find happiness in another.
Okay.
That was all right. Yeah, I can see that. And I can already tell, like, I'm hoping I don't slip up at one of these, because I've printed it out with the original word in here. So I'm going to have to catch myself with donkey.
We'll keep trying to do the donkey thing.
Yeah.
But there's a wealth of stuff in this that takes us, not necessarily, we don't stay with the donkey, but there's theological stuff. Jupiter can do whatever Jupiter wants. Jupiter's not a gin in a bottle, in a lamp, a genie in a lamp. oh, no, this is the last time that I can do this. No, it's the last time that you choose to do it. So when gods in stories do that, and sort of make it seem like it's some limitation that they have, that really bothers me because they don't own their decisions.
Yeah, and then it gives you, it makes you wonder about the gods, right? Like, all right, so is it actually a limitation of Jupiter? No, we know that it's not. He's, the all powerful god in this pantheon. So is it really more like, is it playful in some kind of macabre sort of way? Like, all right, he's sick of the donkey asking him for favors. So, okay, well, this is the last time I can do it because it's going to be the last master that you serve, and he just puts it to him because he's tired of granting requests. Yeah. So there is another moral in there, which is, if you are, it's almost looking a gift horse in a mouth as well, right? If you have somebody who is responsible for assignments, and you start asking for favors, maybe you should be careful how often you approach them for, what it is that you're
cautionary about approaching and asking for too mmany favors. So maybe we go off into the loan shark territory and all that kind of thing. Another animal. But so there's that theological element, but there's also a lot of other stuff going on. What does it say about the herb fellow again?
Yeah, he belonged to an herb seller who gave him too little food and too much work.
Right. Too little food and too much work. And so one is supposed to just live with one's conditions, not want to be better at them. Well, okay, if you ask somebody else to make your conditions better, that's why we have unions. We don't have a donkey union, but and of course they didn't have that when Aesop, fictional or real, was telling these stories. But we're talking about them in the 21st century. And if we're going to take things from it, we can take things from what? I'll just accept your lot in life. That seems awfully ancient, or
yeah, exactly. And this is where we get into I can't remember which animal it was we were talking about, but I said so with that particular story, rather than there being a moral, really what's raised is a philosophical conundrum between how you balance two things. This story is similar, right? So like I said, you can look at it and say, okay, well, you should be careful of how often you're complaining or asking favors from your boss, right? Mm-hmm. But that's balanced with the other side of it, which is if you're really being taken advantage of, or if you're being exposed to subpar conditions, should you just, put up with it? Right, and we see a lot of that in these donkey stories going forward. The donkey stories are very often, you can tell, almost political propaganda, really, to an extent.
Yeah, I think Starbucks would have liked that story.
All right. So the next one we got is the donkey carrying the image.
This is a really interesting one. It raises more questions than it answers. Yeah, which is why I like it. The donkey carrying the image. A donkey once carried through the streets of a city a famous wooden image, capital, to be placed in one of its temples, capital. As he passed along, the crowd made lowly prostration before the image. The donkey, thinking that they bowed their heads in token of respect for himself, bristled up with pride, gave himself airs, and refused to move another step. The driver, seeing him thus stop, laid his whip lustily about his shoulders and said, "Oh, you perverse dullhead, it has not yet come to this, that men pay worship to a donkey."
And maybe we've reached the point in time where we have. I don't know. So, yeah, you're right. I think that this one does raise a lot more questions than it answers. Oh. So, of course, we'll start with the explicit moral, which is they are not wise who give to themselves the credit due to others. Yeah. Which is ridiculous because there really isn't an others in this scenario. There's an image. And I think that that's very important. It's a very important distinction in this story. Yeah. There's no others that are getting credit for it. There's this image. And so the people are paying reverence to the image, and the donkey mistakes it for them paying reference to him. To me here, I think that the more like the purpose of the story is almost relying around the arts, kind of, right? I think with artists, right? If you're an actor or you're a musician or you're a painter or something, and you create these things, I think that what people are paying reverence to is the art itself. And too often, the artists get caught up with this idea that they're being paid homage to, right?
Yes, yeah.
And you can see that backfire. You know, on rare occasions, there is an artist where you say, okay, this is a fantastic specimen of a human being intellectually, or these sorts of things. But more often cases than not, there's a lot of people that I really enjoy their art. But then
wouldn't necessarily go to coffee with them.
Yeah, exactly. I wouldn't go to coffee with them, or I don't want them to tell me how to vote, or I don't want them to tell me, what to believe in, these sorts of things. So that's sort of the message that I took off of the bat, which I don't think was the intended message at all, but that's what jumps off the page.
Well, and that's why I think these stories keep being worthwhile. There are going to be messages heard depending on who we are and our context and our culture and the time. And so, yeah, I think it's certainly about art. It's about, well, image is capitalized, temple's capitalized. So there's a reverential, theocratic or religious notion that seems to be raising itself here. Does the donkey know that they're going to a temple? Does the donkey know what a temple means? To what extent is the anthropomorphizing of the animal making it exactly human with exact human knowledge or not? So if the donkey's walking along with this image and doesn't even know what the image is, and everybody's going, hooray, who wouldn't stop and say, oh, me?
Yeah.
And so the driver can say, no, not you, move on. But no, the driver has to get all violent.
You can pull different morals from the story if we stick with the main moral there, right? Why they're not wise who give themselves the credit due to others.
Right.
You can draw all kinds of things from that, like powerful tech CEOs nowadays, right? You got your Elon Musks, your Jeff Bezos, or your Mark Zuckerbergs, right? You can say the same thing, like, well, really, it's software engineers and other people that built these guys' empires, right? But the way they present themselves and the way that they sort of act like gods, it's really not you specifically as you and the people that helped you build this thing.
Yeah.
But like you just mentioned, if the donkey is unaware of the importance of the image, then that message doesn't really apply to the story. This obliviousness, the idea philosophically of carrying something very important or having something very important that you're unaware of and that you're not responsible for, that people appreciate, that really changes how you interpret what the meaning of the story is altogether.
Yes.
It could be beauty in this case, right?
It could be beauty.
You're in no way responsible for that. You didn't do anything to achieve that, right? And in some cases, you might even be oblivious that you have it. But if everybody's treating you a certain way, then you think that they're
prostrating themselves before you. They're falling down below you. You think there's something special. And again, the message seems to be, don't stray out of the lane. You aren't special. Just keep doing what you're doing. And there's a separation from that thing you're carrying. But there's also an association. And this is the other thing that works for me with this. It's related to something you were just going after. If you are associated with something and therefore have its characteristics, whatever people assign to that thing, they don't know who you are. And if they're not even paying attention to the donkey, they're paying attention to the image. They're not paying attention to the fact that this creature, if it weren't doing its work, that image wouldn't get to the temple. And so the value of the work is being missed. The idea of association, because suppose somebody started hating that image and they all started throwing tomatoes. The donkey's going to get tomatoes in its muzzle and say, what did I do? Whenever we are associated with something much larger than ourselves, we take on the implied attributes or characteristics or aspects of that thing. And if we aren't careful and question what we're associated with, then we can take the brunt of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really excellent moral for that story. I think that works really well. All right. The next one we have is the donkey and the frogs.
And we visited frogs before, but it was in Japan.
Yeah. Probably not the Japanese frogs. Maybe it is. We'll see. So a donkey carrying a load of wood passed through a pond. As he was crossing through the water, he lost his footing, stumbled, and fell. And not being able to rise on account of his load, groaned heavily. Some frogs frequenting the pool heard his lamentations and said, "What would you do if you had to live here always as we do, when you make such a fuss about a mere fall into the water?" This is the fable about me. This is my fable, right? Because you don't want to pride yourself on things, but as you get so far in life and you can identify things about yourself, right? And one of the things I've identified myself is that I perform very, very well in high pressure, high stakes environments. And people comment on all the time, you're so cool and collected. You made all the right decisions and nothing, everything was calculated and worked perfectly, right? And this happens time and time again, to the point now where it's like, I don't even get nervous about stuff. Nothing really phases me. If something happens, doesn't matter if it's a surprise or if it's planned, I just know that I'm going to do well on the big stage, right? But then little things, just the tiniest little things, right? If I try to open a drawer and it doesn't open on the first pull, right? There's words that would make a sailor blush coming out of my mouth. Like the drawer, we talked about it with, Sartre, saying like, oh, this inanimate thing is out to get me, it has an intention to ruin my life, right?
There goes existentialism.
And that's the donkey in the pond, right? The explicit moral there. Men often bear little grievances with less courage than they do large misfortunes.
I like that interpretation.
It's funny because it's a common thing, it might not be completely applicable to everybody. Maybe everybody doesn't do well on the very big stages. But the point is, I think all of us handle some big things without blinking, and then some little things set us right off track.
Yeah.
And it makes me wonder, where does that come from?
It's an interesting evolutionary aspect.
Yeah.
Maybe it's good for humility. Maybe it's good to remind us that, things happen that it's existential. Things happen that have nothing to do with you. Well, how you open a drawer may have something to do with you, but it also may have to do with the drawer sticking and you didn't want it to stick. But when my cat tromped through a paint job I was doing this week, I didn't intend for that. I shouldn't have gotten all exercised about it. I should have said, oh, cool, I should keep the footprints. But no, instead, I say loudly to the cat, what are you doing? Get out of here. But why do I want the cat to do that? Not that it did, because I said so, but then it trumped little footprints up the floor till his toe beans get dry. So I exacerbated the situation.
Right. Yeah, and I'll often do that, right? With that little stuff is that, if you start out and then the littlest thing sets you off track or gets you frustrated, all of your attempts after that are much worse. We have a job at work where you fit these fiberglass rods into holders in a press, right? And these things are very tight tolerances. And so if you're completely relaxed, you can just slide these rods right into the holders. Mm-hmm. But the second you feel even slightly frustrated, I don't know what it is. If your muscles your hands tense up a little bit more, what happens? But they get jammed and they won't go in. And then you get more frustrated, and then so you pull it out and it goes in even worse. And it gets to the point where you can't even get the thing partially in there, and you're just swearing at it, jamming at it, and you're scraping off the corners of it, and it's a mess, right?
Yeah.
And so, and it is interesting to think about that philosophically or psychologically, right? What is the purpose of that? And it's, I think with the big stuff, I think it might be the sort of thing where your brain is probably telling you, okay, this is a moment of life and death, or it's a life-changing moment. So, failure in this situation, or perceived failure in this situation, would do, irreparable harm to the psyche. So as a result, what we need to do is accept whatever consequences happen. And if they're a success, then we did well. And if it's unsuccessful, then there's going to be reasons that we were unsuccessful that don't reflect on us. But I think with the little stuff, that's more like your psyche or your psychology saying, listen, you need to find ways to do things better and more efficient, and to take less time and to, perfect them.
Be one with the material, Obi-Wan.
Yeah. And so we put a lot, it's, the frustration is immediate. I don't know.
I think this is really interesting. You just were talking basically consequentialism and deontology in a sense. But we're also talking Zen. We're talking about a kind of Buddhist notion that you just do it without thinking. And the more you think about it, the more resistance you're going to get. And I think that's a marvelous example that you just used from work, because it is, whether you're on, this may or may not be familiar to people, but if something's gone wrong with your lawnmower and you try to take a certain part of the lawnmower off to fix it, and then you bend a screw while you're taking it out, then you sometimes could lose your composure.
Yeah.
And then you end up hurting your hand by hitting your thumb because you whacked something that wasn't with a hammer because you were angry. And of course, that doesn't help anything.
Right. Yeah. Western New York is flush with examples of that, especially working on your own car, with the way things, salt on the road rusts everything and bolts lock up and everything. But yeah, I think, and so, I'm in the process of resealing my driveway right now, and I love it. And I think that the reason I love it is because it's so simple, right? Nothing bad can happen, really nothing. If I'm sealing the cracks, and if I put too much sealant on it, doesn't matter. If I run out of sealant and I don't get to fill all the cracks, I'll get them next year. They'll come back, what's the big deal? You're putting the sealant on. Okay, maybe you get a little bit on the foundation of the house. Nobody cares. Nobody's going to be looking, It's just this nice, simple activity. And I think we're tempted to say that it's mindless, right? It's a mindless activity. But what we've found with modern psychology is that nothing's really mindless, right? If you're doing mindless, even if you're not focused on the task you're doing, your default mode network kicks in, and the daydreams and the other things take you places, and your brain can actually accomplish some really good work, like Einstein in the post office, right?
Yeah.
Doing these things that we consider mindless, your brain can actually be doing very serious work during those times, or during sleep or whatnot. So yeah, it's really, it's an interesting.
And why did he go through the pond in the first place?
Yeah.
If it's a
was
pond,
there no other way around? I don't know.
There's that too.
Yeah. It's a donkey. So I don't know. We don't have high expectations for him. So the next one is the donkey's brains.
Yes. This is a rather grim tale. Even though it's Aesop, I couldn't help it. Grim tales. All right. This is called The Donkey's Brains. The lion and the fox went hunting together. Which seems, that's editorializing. It seems, okay, we'll picture it. The lion, on the advice of the fox, sent a message to the donkey proposing to make an alliance between their two families. The donkey came to the place of meeting, overjoyed at the prospect of a royal alliance. But when he came there, the lion simply pounced on the donkey and said to the fox, "Here is our dinner for today. Watch you here while I go and have a nap. Woe betide you if you touch my prey." The lion went away and the fox waited. but finding that his master did not return, ventured to take out the brains of the donkey and ate them up. When the lion came back, he soon noticed the absence of the brains and asked the fox in a terrible voice, "What have you done with the brains?" "Brains, your majesty. It had none, or it would never have fallen into your trap." and the stated moral is, wit has always an answer ready.
Which is a good moral if the story is about the fox.
Right.
I think
it's exactly it.
If the story is about the fox, I think that's great. And I think that I think I hear this story and 2 or 3 people that I know in real life pop to mind as being the fox. I go, yeah, you know what? They might not necessarily be the smartest people. They might not always make the best choices, but man, they always know the right thing to say. But the moral for the donkey is a little bit different because I think that in that case, it's sort of being wary of who offers you an alliance, right? Why would a lion want an alliance with a donkey? What would a donkey possibly have to offer a lion, that you should come running to something that is a natural predator?
Well, then we have the donkey, who is a simple animal, a simple person, if we're putting people in the stage, who, I could actually be associated with a better family, And, okay, so maybe what one can understand, but certainly the donkey is not a strategist. One would have thought if the donkey had seen the fox with the lion, but the donkey can't run fast enough, and the donkey gets there and pounce. It's the end of donkey.
Yeah.
So that moral does not apply to the donkey. You're right.
Yeah, I think, with these sort of 3 animal stories, it becomes easier to see each animal as a certain concept, right? You see the lion as power, and you see the fox as wit. And maybe that's the reason they're together in the first place, right? Maybe the fox got in the lion's ear and said, "Hey, listen, I got a really good nose. I can track stuff. I'll know where things are. Hey, we don't even have to do all that. Like, let's just call the donkey over. He's dumb. He'll come in. We can just eat him. It's an easy meal, So you have all these images in, clearly in your mind. And I think with the donkey, it is simplicity, right? And I think that's what a lot of these stories are sort of telling us about him, is that,
you call me, I come. You're the king. Yeah, I mean, there's that element too. You don't say no to the royal family. The donkey comes along and immediately gets hit. And the lion, being of such privilege, I mean, there's the thing to me about privilege. Okay, I killed it. Now I can sleep for a while. Well, then you weren't hungry in the first place. You were preparing to be hungry later, and so you're stocking your larder. Moreover, you can order the fox to leave it alone. And so, yes, it's a sort of a king and a jester thing. But who gets hurt? The underdog.
Yeah.
Who's just forgotten in the story and becomes a point of laughter. And for me, this is very much applicable to so much in the 21st century, where decisions are made, where people are led into thinking, this is going to be good for me. And it isn't. And so things that look like they might be good for you maybe be questionable. I think that would be a better moral.
Yeah, that's a really good moral. And I think it's funny that, like we were talking about, most of these stories about the donkey are like, it's really a government to citizen sort of moral that's trying to be relayed and how citizens should act. But this one, I mean, is so troubling, it's almost hard to see it not in the opposite way, which you just clearly laid out, which is that, wait a minute, should we come at the beck and call of governments, or government officials, or, should we, if they're offering us something that sounds too good to be true, should we be skeptical, and more often than that, the people that are serving these powerful figures, should we be wary of how they're using their wit or how they're bending the ears or these sorts of things? There's a lot in there.
There is.
That's.
I think of the fox as Loki in this one.
Yeah, exactly.
Always the trickster.
Yeah. All right. The next one is the donkey and the lion skin. A donkey, having put on the lion's skin, roamed about in the forest and amused himself by frightening all of the foolish animals he met in his wanderings. At last, coming upon a fox, he tried to frighten him also. But the fox no sooner heard the sound of his voice than he exclaimed, "I might possibly have been frightened myself if I had not heard your bray." So the explicit moral here is clothes may disguise a fool, but his words will give him away. Okay, I guess that,
but the donkey is having fun. To me, in that he puts on. Well, say it again.
Yeah. He puts on the lion's skin and roams about in the forest and amuses himself by frightening all the foolish animals he meets in his wanderings.
Okay, questions need to be asked. Where did he find a lion's skin?
Yeah, I think there's a different version of this one that starts with that some hunters had killed a lion and skinned him, and he snuck into their camp and took it. So I think there's another version that does give you an origin for how he found it.
All right, so he puts this the lion's gone. Well, the lion's clearly not been good to donkeys in the past. So why wouldn't a donkey mock the lion and try to feel what it's like to be in charge, because the lion clearly wants everyone to fear it. And so, of course, the fox is going to take the donkey down witheringly because the fox is the wit. But one wonders if the fox just for a moment wasn't scared.
Yeah, and he even admits, he says, "I might possibly have been frightened myself if I had not heard your bray." And I think in the other story, it actually says that he was scared until he heard the donkey bray. So again, I think that between the two of them, you get this image of the fox being scared, but trying to cover the fact that he was scared retrospectively, saying, well, you almost had me, right. But I wasn't, I figured it out beforehand,
Right. So, but we picture, I can't help this. I picture the donkey wearing a lion's skin. All right, it would drape on the donkey. If the donkey's wandering along, then animal, let's say people might say, lion, let's keep our distance. So do what a leader does, but don't try to sound like the leader. That's one that's an alternate that comes to me. Have your fun, but don't have so much fun that you're going to get discovered. That's you wouldn't want to teach a child that, but
yeah. I'm guessing the moral, if we look at the donkey and the lion in their respective roles as you start to conceptualize them throughout the fables, you'd think that probably the message they were trying to send was, that there's a separation between the lower classes and the upper classes, right? Mm-hmm. So if you're a peasant, don't try to be, bourgeoisie, you have no place, having power or, acting this way, it's you, and everybody's going to know as soon as you start talking,
It's a really interesting, and I'm not going to tread over lines here by saying this in very general terms. It's really interesting when you have a lion and everyone else says, "Oh, I want to roar just like the lion," and the lion likes it.
Yeah.
When we talk about politics, so I think that there's many ways of reading this. Wear the disguise, but don't go too far, or when you don't kid yourself to think you can be something that you're not.
Mm-hmm.
Again,
right?
Or don't talk, just do. So it's fascinating.
Yeah. Like you said, depending on how you view the role of the lion and the role of the donkey and the intent behind it, I think it's important that it says the donkey was amusing himself, right? Not that the donkey was actually
trying to.
Right. Yeah. I think that's an important distinction.
Who doesn't come up behind somebody once in a while and say boo?
Right.
That's why before, these are on the ground kind of things. We can associate ourselves with the donkey. For heaven's sake, can't we have fun before the lion eats us?
Right. All right. The next one is the donkey and the old shepherd, which this one is explicitly a government to governed story.
I totally concur. A shepherd, watching his donkey feeding in a meadow, was alarmed all of a sudden by the cries of the enemy. He appealed to the donkey to fly with him, lest they should both be captured, but the animal lazily replied, "Why should I pray? Why should I pray? Do you think it likely the conqueror will place on me 2 sets of panniers?" "No," rejoined the shepherd. "Then," said the donkey, "as long as I carry the panniers, what matters it to me whom I serve?" And so the explicit moral is, in a change of government, the poor change nothing beyond the name of their master.
Okay, so you can see that, but I think that there's a lot of other political morals in that story as well. So we can start with that one, which is, the explicit one that they say is in there. And there's some truth to that, right? And I think that attitude pervaded American political attitudes up until the Trump election, pretty much. I think before then there was this sort of apathetic attitude towards politics, which was, well, it's really Republican, Democrat, it doesn't matter, right? Like, it's all the same. Nothing's going to change in my life, right? Mm-hmm. Now there's been an increasingly polarized political environment since then, and if anything, it's the pendulum has swung in the other direction, where now it's, oh, well, if this person gets elected, everything about your normal life is going to change and fall apart, and
the apocalyptic warning.
Yeah, but in general, right? Like, if you look at that, okay, it's in a change of government. The people at the lowest levels, and especially back when the fable was written, right? All right, the Greeks are in charge, the Macedonians are in charge, whoever. Well, we're just going to keep farming, we're going to keep, paying taxes. We're going to keep doing this stuff, living and dying, nothing's going to change there, Right. It's those people at the upper levels. When governments change, throughout history, especially violently at those upper levels, you look at the history of Rome, right? Towards the end of Rome, there's a period where in 50 years, they went through like 52 emperors or something. And those guys didn't retire, they didn't live to see retirement. So it's those high level people that are most likely to get the axe.
This is, you're right. This is a very socio-political piece. This little piece. It's always the little ones that are fascinating, because the reference to something, a concept, the enemy came. We don't identify an enemy. Because it's implying that there's always an enemy.
Right, yeah.
So the enemy is the enemy of that moment, as you were saying with the Romans as an extended example. And why should the donkey... This is where we have the anthropomorphizing hitting its own wall. There's clearly a difference between a donkey and a shepherd. Now, if the donkey is speaking, and yet the donkey is a donkey, then the donkey is probably not going to have political affiliations at all. What political affiliations would a shepherd have? But
right,
but they're there. There's a warning, and gotta run. And I'll just wear the yoke of the next guy. I'm going to keep doing this because it's my lot in life.
Right. Yeah.
We're back to that again. And in this case, the donkey has accepted it. The donkey doesn't say, "Oh," which could have happened in an alternative version of the story. "I'll tell the enemy where you ran." and then I'll be the friend of the enemy.
Yeah, and I wish I'm looking at it now, and we didn't pick any stories that had those sorts of aspects of the donkey. There's a lot of aspects of in the donkey stories where the donkey is discontent with his lot, and he tries to do something and it doesn't work out for him. And somehow, despite picking 8 of these stories, I don't think that we have any with that in it. But yeah, it raises that specter, and an even more interesting political, sort of aspect to it is this fact that so the shepherd says that they have to escape together in order to survive. Well, what's stopping the donkey from just running off, right? From whether it's from the enemy or from the shepherd, right?
Right.
Because if they're going to leave together, if they're, their fates are tied together, undoubtedly the way they're going to escape is the shepherd's going to ride the donkey to safety. The donkey is the faster animal.
That's right.
So yeah, what's stopping the donkey from just taking off?
Is the donkey just accepting the role because that's what the donkey does? Yeah, and is the shepherd less likely to survive because the donkey is going to be transport, or would the donkey be food later? I mean, if a lion can eat a donkey, so can a human being.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's also interesting to me that the shifting of the choice of words for the titles. So in this one we have the shepherd, but the other we had the word master. Well, presumably the shepherd's a master, unless the shepherd's the middle management.
Yeah.
In which case the shepherd's being held to account for something that his master did. I mean, it seems so simple, but it is politically fraught.
Yeah, and that is.
I like yours about why didn't he just run away?
Right. And he
was wild after all.
Right. Yeah. Because he is technically an A-word, not a donkey in the story. But yeah, so this is sort of a trope that has reappeared with all of the animals that we've looked at, is that what makes these fables so interesting and so malleable is the fact that they're so short. You're left to infer the background story based off of the little detail that you have. And that one is really interesting to me that you brought up, is that what if the shepherd doesn't own the donkey? The shepherd is working for somebody else who owns the donkey. Then that does create a different dynamic for how they react to an enemy coming in.
I'm going back to Starbucks again. not just as an example, but you've got people on the ground serving. You got managers who do this and that, but help serve sometimes and manage. And then you've got the corporate owner. And what you do on the ground reflects the corporate owner. Now, Aesop didn't know anything about this, right? But so do I call somebody if police are doing something that they seem like they shouldn't be doing with a customer? Or do I just say, well, our policy is not to intervene because that's what it can bring all of it. I would use these stories in any workshop with any profession.
Yeah. Yeah. And I have a friend who, he works in a union, and him and I have discussions about this all the time, right? About how, unions, they serve very important functions. But sometimes they do the opposite. Sometimes they can protect very bad people from consequences, and again, this moral of the, it's less of an explicit moral of us telling you what's happening as raising a philosophical question about, well, how do you balance this and this? And in this case, I think that the shepherd is the one, right? Because in the scenario you brought up with like a Starbucks, right? Something happens. It's that middle manager that faces the tough decisions, right? I think that the people on the ground, right? All right, well, they have no active interest in the welfare of the company necessarily, right? Because it's the pannier, right?
Right.
If I lose this job, I can go get another job. It's not, another job that's similar. It's not a big deal. But I'm being actively confronted in person with something that I know is wrong. So I'm going to take this action. The corporate owner has the exact opposite effect. There's no personal confrontation with the evil that's being done, but there is a very high motivation to maintain ownership and to maintain homeostatic ownership over this environment. The middle manager, the guy in between, that's where it gets interesting, right? He's being he's incentivized enough to look out for the welfare of the company that, you know, he wants to make sure that the corporate owners are satisfied. But then the people on the ground, he is seeing some of that, right? They're coming back to him. They're giving him stories of what they're seeing, or maybe they're seeing it themselves. And you're stuck with that decision, right? The decision is very clear for the master, and it's very clear for the donkey. But for the shepherd, it's kind of, well, whose side am I on? What am I picking?
I like that analysis. By the way, pannier is a basket. So the donkey's carrying baskets. The things are being put in.
Right.
My brother, who's a truck driver and a highway worker, has this marvelous motto. He says, we pick things up, we put things down. and when we were talking one day, I said, well, you know, that applies to almost everything, doesn't it? That's what human beings do. But I think in this case, the donkey is saying, what difference does it make? We pick things up, you put things in the basket, you take things out of the basket.
But we go back to the first story, the donkey and his masters, right? What if the shepherd currently is loading your panniers with herbs, and what if the enemy is going to load it with tiles? Right? So maybe these people on the floor should be a little bit more, have more concern about who the corporate owner is, or the political owner, right? We're coming back to that other story, right? Saying, what is, you know, it doesn't affect
they're all
us.
the same. Yes,
Right.
they're not all
Right.
No, nobody's the same as anything else. No leader is exactly the same. If they were, nobody would be trying to choose leaders in the first place.
Right.
It would just solve itself.
Yeah.
And that seemingly in somebody's brain exonerates their attempt to be involved. Well, it's all going to be the same, so it doesn't matter. So in that way, you can read the donkey as being a totally disinterested political participant who, if he chose to participate, might change the course of things.
Yeah. That story, man, that one's chock full of morals. There's tons of them. All right, the next one I have is the donkey, the rooster, and the lion. And again, I've changed the wording on the other one too, just in case for podcast censors. So a donkey and a rooster were in a straw yard together when a lion, desperate from hunger, approached the spot. He was about to spring upon the donkey when the rooster, to the sound of whose voice the lion, it is said, has a singular aversion, crowed loudly, and the lion fled away as fast as he could. The donkey, observing his trepidation at the mere crowing of the rooster, summoned courage to attack him and galloped after him for that purpose. He had run no long distance when the lion, turning about, seized him and tore him to pieces. So that's one too. We've talked about it before. Any of these three animal fables are pretty complicated. And so, you know, thinking about what is this trying to tell me? The explicit moral is false confidence is the forerunner of misfortune. All right, we can see that. That's a pretty obvious part of it, but it doesn't, you know, it doesn't tell the whole story. That leaves the rooster out of it completely, right? And I think what the rooster did is the central aspect of that story.
Yes, right? And the donkey, I read the donkey as, hey, I want to help. You could crow, I can chase. But the trouble is the donkey chases too far. The donkey, get out of here, you.
Yeah.
But
and looking at the animals that we've looked at so far, right? The lion is this sort of symbol of power, this sort of symbol of majesty, of political prowess, right? And the donkey is simple. The rooster we haven't really looked at much, but what you do see is that the donkey and the rooster have a symbiotic relationship, right? They probably live on a farm together, and the farm probably survives because each animal, or in this case, you know, person, right, does their part.
Yeah.
Including the shepherd, who might not be in this story, but we just talked about him, so he's fresh in our mind. Right?
He comes running in.
Yeah. So what you see is that the lion, despite all of his power and all of his majesty and whatnot, could be defeated by a simple rooster, right? Just crowing. It's so tempting to say, based off of the way that we've examined the lion so far, that the rooster might be the media.
Yeah. I think the rooster is good journalism, because here I go reading more, because the rooster has an authentic voice. It's authentic for the rooster to crow at the lion. Now, that's folklore too. I don't know any bird that would stand up to it. I can't think of a rooster really. This is like a wives' tale or a grandma's tale or whatever. That's okay. We'll take it as it is. The rooster has an authentic voice, but it's not authentic for the donkey to chase the lion. So again, what's your role? What are your limits? What are your gifts and graces? What are your skills? And the donkey just forgets that. Sometimes we forget things. Sometimes we rush in to try to do something authentically and are in over our heads.
Yeah, again, this philosophical conundrum that's created, right? We've looked at all of these examples of the donkey as representing people from lower classes, and how the morals of the stories are telling you stay in your place, know what you are and what you aren't, and abide by that. And then there's the other part of it that says, well, like with the donkey and the shepherd, right, where the donkey's completely disinterested, but the donkey has the capability to change the entire outcome of the story and the scenario that he's in. So balancing these two things, right? And this is something that everybody faces on a daily basis, right? When we're applying for a new job, right? If you're reaching for a job that's just a little bit beyond your skill set, well, which donkey are you, right? Are you the donkey that should stay in your place and know what you can do and continue to grind along at your one thing and be content with what you have and not seek a new master? Or are you being, if you don't pursue the job, are you being the donkey that's just apathetic and every job is the same and it doesn't matter what I do as long as I'm getting my paycheck for, towing around my panniers, then life is life, right?
Yeah.
Those are the deep philosophical questions that are hidden in these little paragraphs.
This is why they last.
It's fascinating.
It is.
All right. So our last story is the donkey and the mule.
I have to laugh because we should establish that a mule is a cross between a donkey and a horse.
So, and that in the other stories that, again, we didn't read for time's sake. And we could have done 2 episodes on donkeys if we wanted to. But horse shows up in some of the donkey stories, right? And the horse occupies a position of superiority. It's more sophisticated and classy and elegant than the donkey in the stories. So the mule is a cross between the two of them, and we'll kind of see who the mule emulates in his role.
All right, the donkey and the mule. A muleteer, this is a person who drives donkeys, set forth on a journey, driving before him a donkey and a mule, both well laden. The donkey, as long as he traveled along the plain, carried his load with ease, but when he began to ascend the steep path of the mountain, felt his load to be more than he could bear. He entreated his companion to relieve him of a small portion, that he might carry home the rest. But the mule paid no attention to the request. The donkey shortly afterwards fell down dead under his burden. Not knowing what else to do in so wild a region, the muleteer placed upon the mule the load carried by the donkey, in addition to his own, and at the top of all placed the hide of the donkey. And we're back to the tanner again. After he had skinned him, the mule, groaning beneath his heavy burden, said to himself, I am treated according to my deserts. If I had only been willing to assist the donkey a little in his need, I should not now be bearing together with his burden himself as well.
Lots of stories in this one. There's lots of stories in this one. So The explicit moral: an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Yeah, we've all heard that.
Yeah. And that moral kind of applies to, in an odd way to a couple different aspects of the story, which these morals normally don't do. But so, I think that the first way that it's referring to it is the most obvious, which is that, if the mule, being a more superior physical specimen to the donkey, had helped the donkey when the donkey asked for help, then, it would have been a little bit tougher for him. But in the long run, it would have been better because he wouldn't have been loaded with everything that the donkey had. And, that one's pretty obvious. But there's other things in there.
Things in there. So the muleteer is the muleteer a master? The muleteer is not a shepherd. The muleteer is a truck driver. And so the donkey feels. Now it said this is interesting because this is translation from translation from translation, and we know how the phone game works. But the donkey, as he traveled, when he started going up a steep path, felt he had more to bear than he could. Well, that's ambiguous. Maybe he didn't have more than he could bear, and the muleteer knew it. But that would mean trusting the muleteer. Why would a donkey trust the muleteer? Where's the source of that? Do you trust that to whom you answer? And I think that's a theme that's working in there. And in fact, he couldn't bear it because he died. So once again, as with so many of the donkey stories, the donkey is a victim. Sometimes the donkey is a victim of its own irrational decision making. Sometimes the donkey is a victim because he tries to play the game the way the game goes, with the king, for instance. But it's always the donkey is a victim, except and out of this set. I'm just extrapolating from the set, except the one where keeps the panniers, works for the enemy, So, but the moral is about the mule. It's not about the donkey. The donkey doesn't necessarily get morals,
right,
attached.
Yeah, same thing with the donkey's brains, right?
Yeah.
There's no, the donkey's just a victim. Things just happen to him, right?
But be a wit, and you can get out of anything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, the donkey wasn't a wit, but
right. Yeah, it is an interesting story like that. There was something else in there, and I'm trying to think now what it was. I don't have it in front of me. But.
All right. So they take off. They're on a journey. They're going up a flat plain. Everything's fine. They start to go up a mountain. The donkey is concerned. He asks for help for just carrying a little bit of the mule. The mule says no. Then the donkey falls down and dies. Yeah,
there's a lot. So I think what's interesting here is from the mule's viewpoint, right? It's not like right off the bat the donkey said, hey, this is too much, take some, without trying. When they're on the flat plain, everything was fine. So when the donkey started complaining when they're going up the hill, that probably should have tipped off the mule that something was actually wrong, right? On top of that, with the muleteer, right? So he loaded up these two animals and the donkey ends up dying. Well, rather than sacrificing any of the load, he throws it all on the mule. What do you think is going to stop the mule from dying under the heavy load?
The muleteer is not being very thoughtful of the future possible consequences of this. Exactly. Good point.
It's a similar fable to the monkey grabbing the nuts out of the hole in the tree, right? In reaching for a treasure, right? Sometimes you're so desperate to hang on to that thing that you have, that you're willing to sacrifice it all. It's an all or nothing thing, right?
And that's what the muleteer is doing. You're right. That's
rather
happening.
than looking at the loads and just deciding what he can and can't take. he loads everything on the mule and even skins the donkey and puts the skin on there, right?
Which doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense, although he's trying to use everything that he has. But where's the muleteer in this discussion with the donkey and the mule? I mean, these are not huge animals,
right?
The cart has got to be right there, or they're carrying the panniers again, and so are you so inattentive that you don't know when you've got too much on your animal, or do you so not value it that you know you can just get another donkey, in which case the donkey is easily sacrificed? Well, now we can go back to workers. Workers are easily sacrificed when you think you can find them anywhere.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, or maybe the mule's silence, right? It says the mule ignored the request, is because the muleteer would have to be the one to rebalance the load anyways. It was outside of the mule's hands, right? What are they going to do with their hooves? You know, and that might be part of it too, right? If you have two types of workers that are both under, you know, the
duress,
a corporate structure, one guy might ask for the other one for help, and the other guy might know, listen, I can't help you out because if I stray out of my department, I'm going to get the axe anyways, right? It has to be the boss that redistributes these things, you know?
I have a question that is inviting us to put some of these, to look at the cluster of stories we chose. And you don't have to go here, but I am curious if you were called in to consult and if you were called in to help with recruitment for the Army, or if you were in a position where you were taking new recruits and training them, which, if any, of this cluster would you use as a story about how to survive in the Army, or how to survive because you're a soldier?
That's a very difficult question, because merely the prospect of this hypothetical scenario puts me into one of these stories, right? Because the recruits are going to be the donkey, and the army is going to be the lion, and I'm going to be a shepherd or a mule or one of these other animals, which we've discussed is the most difficult position to be in, right? I would never be a recruiter for the army.
Okay.
Because for that very reason, right? Like I've been the donkey in these stories. And I know what the donkey puts up with, and I don't agree with a lot of what the donkeys put up with. So I would be hard pressed to be in that situation. But if you were, I know what you're trying to get across, which is the fact that the army is a necessary organization. It's a very solidly hierarchical association, right? So what morals do you want to give to these people that are going to help them execute their function best? Well, it depends. If we're looking at them as soldiers, or if we're looking at them as human beings? And I think that you necessarily have to, it's a relativistic thing, right? Both of those things exist at the same time, but not necessarily together, right? So the government is looking at soldiers as assets, but families and friends and individuals are looking at soldiers as human beings. And the morals that you tell them and the ways that you expect them to act in their stories and the way that things play out are vastly different depending on those situations, right? So, you know, the donkey and his master, sure, that'd be a good one if you're the government, right? You know, the donkey and, you know, it's very, I don't know. If
it's
you were
not as simple as that,
right,
is it? Yeah.
Right. Because if you're in that middle manager spot, it's, well, then you can't serve two masters, right? So are you going to hand down the government message, or having been, and you often see this struggle with these people, with recruiters and with drill sergeants. I notice this, having interacted with, you know, several of them throughout my career, is you do see them struggle with this. There are some that are clearly on the government side, and most of the time it's not with enthusiasm that they're delivering the government's message. It's more from a place of apathy or resignedness. It's just, okay, well, we're going to convince these guys to join because that's our job and this is what needs to be done, right? There's no, I don't think I ever met a recruiter or a drill sergeant that was full-throatedly pro army or government, So I think that tells you something right there.
That tells me a lot. So maybe the Fox is involved here.
Yes. I think that in a lot of these cases, the recruiters or the drill sergeants that are full-throatedly for or executing the government's orders to the letter, in many cases, are Foxes.
I sprung that question on you.
Then there are some that are sympathetic to the plight of the donkey, who realize that the donkey has found himself in a place that he did not intend to end up. And in that case, the way that rules are bent or the ways that blind eyes are turned to things let you know that, the plight is understood. Mm-hmm. And what character is that in the story? I'm not sure. I'm sure that it's in here. But who is it? It might be the mule, could be. It could be.
I like the way you're going with this because it illustrates a point. And the point is these stories are much more complicated than they seem to be. And you can't just lift them out and say, well, I'll just take any 5 stories and just hand them out to somebody in a workshop that I'm doing and say, I can tell you from these 5 stories how life's going to be for you in this company or in this organization. No, it seems superficial to think that way.
Yeah, and you see that even across the animals, right? With these donkey stories, like we just mentioned, the donkey's always the victim. Like the outcome for the donkey is almost always the same, but the morals of those stories are vastly different. Whereas in the fox tales, you almost never know what's going to happen to the fox. Maybe the fox wins through his wit. Maybe the fox gets eaten up. Maybe the fox thinks he's being witty, but is actually stupid. Like, there's something that's always a little bit different. So yeah, I think you're absolutely right. There's a complexity, not just in the individual fables, and not just among the choice of animals, but even among how those animals interact and all these different things and how you relate that to everyday life is extraordinary.
Or any one of your life experiences. I mean, I would choose. There's one I know I would choose in this instance if I were trying to get a new employee to think about the reasons for joining a union, assuming the union was an ethical union, and there are plenty. I would use the lion, the rooster, and the donkey.
Yeah, that's a perfect one, right? Which is that, hey, listen, we have to work together.
Yes, and the rooster is going to crow at the lion if the lion's getting out of hand or taking advantage, and shoo the lion back. But if the workers assume that means anything is possible and they can just take down the whole of corporate structure, they're going to get eaten.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. So, man, this has been fun. I think we'll try to do one more animal, and then we're gonna tie up the series with an episode on Aesop and some of the overarching meta questions that we have about the fables, and that'll be episode 100. So we're looking to do something special for it. Yeah. So until next time, keep on.